Hey friends, Dean here. Before we get you on to your episode, I want to take a moment to invite you to our next virtual online trivia night. Wednesday, May 13th at 8 p.m. Join us either on our Facebook group or on our YouTube page for 3 rounds of fun trivia, music questions, movie questions, general knowledge questions. It'll be a fun time and a chance to win some prizes and have just a good relaxing night of some trivia at home. You don't even have to go out for it. So don't forget, Wednesday, March 13th at 8 p.m. Join us on our Facebook group or YouTube for 3 rounds of fun virtual online trivia. We'll see you there. In this episode, I had a clever introduction written, but oh well, whatever. Never mind. Stay with us.
Get ready for the 3324 podcast, where lifelong friends Dean Legiro and Eric Kuber share their love of all things music and movies. Dean has directed short films and is a music trivia buff, and Eric, trained in audio engineering, brings his extensive knowledge of music and film to the conversation as they discuss, debate, and celebrate their favorite albums, films, and much more.
Welcome, friends, to the 3324 podcast. My name is Dean Legiro, here with Eric Kuber.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm doing good, and the first time we've got a special guest with us. Oh boy, we got someone to help us do the heavy lifting. And this is our good friend Andy Cremeans.
How's it going, everybody?
And Andy is going to help us with this very special subject. And Andy is also an artist extraordinaire, and he does a lot of great artwork. Absolutely incredible and stunning. And I'm not saying that because we're paying him to be on the podcast. It's true. So we're going to drop a link. He's at Andy Cremeans Art on Instagram. So go check him out. We'll also put a link in the show notes. And this is a very special episode. We're going to be talking about the monster. And when you hear the stats, it fits. We're talking about the monster album from Nirvana, Nevermind. So we're gonna jump right in. We'll get the stats going, and then we'll start the conversation. And we've got a lot to talk about. So let me get you some of these stats, and we'll get the nuts and bolts out of the way. So this album came out in September 1991, and it was produced by Butch Vig. Now, Butch Vig became a much bigger producer after this, and he had done a lot of work before his work with Nirvana, mostly with some punk bands, some underground stuff. Oddly enough, at the time that he was working with Nirvana, he was also producing the Smashing Pumpkins release Gish. So he was just breaking into the big time with this. And then he would also go on to form the band Garbage in 1995 with Shirley Manson. So he's done a lot of different things. Sales, this album sold $10,640,000. So that's diamond status. At its apex, was selling 300,000 copies per week, which is absolutely insane. I'm sure most artists would be happy just to sell 300,000.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Just absolutely. So we are talking a modern classic, and it's not even that modern. As far as singles and charts, "Smells Like Teen Spirit" was the first single released, hit number 6. "Come As You Are" was the second one, hit number 32. "Lithium" hit number 64, and then "In Bloom" didn't chart. So that's basically the rundown of it, and I'm sure everybody has definitely heard "Smells Like Teen Spirit." So what we want to do, though, is we want to kind of, before we get into Nirvana and this album, because it was such an important it was a turning point for in a lot of different ways, and that's why Andy's here also, because he is a little bit younger than us. So yeah, we're old and he's young. Okay, that's it. We're putting it out there.
Thanks for saying so, man. I don't feel it. I appreciate the thought, though.
Well, okay, how about this? Back when this album came out, you were really young and we were kind of young.
Yeah, I was 14 when it came out. I was prime. I was ripe for the taking.
There we go.
We were jumping over that first hurdle, I think.
Yeah, so basically what we've got here is we've got some different point of views, which is really what's going to be interesting. Is Andy he said he was 14. Eric and I were in our mid-20s, but all of us were music consumers at the time, right? So, and Andy's got a different perspective than what we would have if Eric and I had just done this show. So we're going to kind of, Andy's going to kind of take us through some of this. But we want to do is, this album came out in 91. So we want to kind of back up a little bit, because what's important is what was happening basically in the 2 to 3 years before that, right, Andy?
Yeah, it's weird because around that time it was, you've got Wilson Phillips, you've got CNC Music Factory, you've got Color Me Bad, on the radio, and there's not a whole lot of anger going on at all on the radio. And something happened like in the middle of 91. I don't know if it was the Gulf War. I don't know what was happening, but like everybody just got really pissed off in 1991 because this was what, September 91, and the Metallica Black album was August 91, 1 month later. And, it just, angry music went inexplicably mainstream. It was like everybody was ready, and maybe just kind of the grunge movement let people have like a diet version of angry music or something like that compared to heavy metal or something like that. But it was the year that Metallica just went, stratospheric, and then Guns N' Roses right behind that, and then grunge started picking up, and then like a year later Megadeth was on the charts. It's like, Megadeth is on the charts, what's going on here? So it was a huge thing. We went from a lot of pop like CNC Music Factory, Everybody Dance Now, to Here We Are Now, Entertain Us, or like Metallica, Sad But True, just like blaring out of speakers, and it was just a huge thing. And previous to that, I mean, the only really heavy music that was going on the charts at that time, really, that was even charting, was stuff like Extreme and Steelheart and like Firehouse and all the power ballad stuff. Like everything had kind of petered out. The hairband scene had kind of petered out. Everybody was kind of getting sick of that too. So there was this vacuum there, waiting for something to happen. It was just like, what do you suppose happened? Where do you think we got to there from? I mean, how do we get there?
Yeah, I think you touched on a lot of important things there, because I was also looking at some of the charts too, because I was just trying to refresh, because Nirvana, Nevermind was just so gigantic. And then, but when I looked at the charts, I expected to see a whole bunch of other kind of artists of that ilk on the charts. And you're right. I mean, and that's, if we go back to 89, which is 2 years before, you've still got Bobby Brown hitting the charts. You've got Poison, right? So that right there is like the hairband metal. And that really is what metal had evolved to, from really, because Ozzy had even joined like the hairband look and everything.
Yeah.
So metal, which was kind of we'll call it the kind of the subculture of 80s, because 80s was all about the pop music and the synths and all that. And the metal scene had evolved into a glorified glam, right? Everything was about the look. It was about the guys with the teased hair, the lipstick, the spandex, and what was on the horizon was something very different. But the charts don't even reflect really even that. Mm-mm. In 89, Paula Abdul's still hitting, and like Andy said, Wilson Phillips, Madonna with Vogue, which was a giant hit, Phil Collins. Michael Bolton was a top 12 in 1990 in the year-end charts. So we're just still seeing, we're kind of still seeing the vestiges of the 80s, really, like those glassy or those glossy produced songs, that poppy stuff, Belle Biv DeVoe, and a lot of that soul music and rhythm and blues kind of music was still very popular and dominating the charts. Yeah. And then the metal kind of we'll call it a kind of a subculture, although it wasn't, was very vibrant and kind of driving the rock aspect of things, I suppose.
Yeah. There was darker, danker parts of heavy metal that never made it, everybody was, had the Slayer shirt or the Metallica shirt or whatever, that you go to specific shows for that stuff. You don't, those guys don't wear the makeup. They don't they're wearing ripped up jeans and shirts and stuff like that. That was a subculture though. That wasn't the mainstream. And, those are the people that, you got called burnouts for being, having long hair. Every time I would wear a Metallica shirt, everybody like, oh, you want to kill your mom? Like, oh, you worship Satan and all this stuff. It was a very specific thing. And then, yada, 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 after grunge, all of those jocks that would beat me up for having long hair all had long hair and were smoking pot. So it's like a huge thing, like a huge story arc happened after grunge. So I'm jumping ahead though. But I mean, I was just going to say
would some of that stuff, would that be considered, would that stuff you were talking about, like Slayer and stuff, would that be like the subgenre of like thrash Would that
Yeah,
be considered in that era thrash or speed metal?
I don't think that at the time, because I was really into the hair stuff. My uncle was in a band in California, and I was raised on it. I loved Rat and Cinderella and all those guys. I don't think anybody really called that metal at the time, though. I think it was just rock. Like rock and roll music or hard rock, that sort of stuff. But nobody was looking at Cinderella and being like heavy metal, dude. It was more like it wasn't as harsh or as gritty as the metal was reserved for the darker reaches of the genre.
I think that kind of Cinderella was. I think Cinderella was heavy metal for the people that were really afraid of heavy metal.
Yeah.
So you would get like the Cinderellas, the Poisons, the Motley Crues, kind of occupying all that same space of kind of radio or image friendly heavy metal, right? Because I'm sure they would consider themselves rock and roll or heavy metal, I suppose, back then.
Sure.
And that whole thing was driven just mainly by MTV too. It was about the look, and that look would get you exposure on MTV and video plays, and and then it became a self-feeding machine where you got like Cinderella, who looked like Poison, who looked like Motley Crue, like it was just kind of replicating and just kind of like cloning each other.
For every clone, their hair got a little higher and a little higher. Yeah. And the
makeup a little thicker.
Yeah. And the holes in the chaps got bigger. Yeah. So like, there were some guys that kind of crossed over. I mean, Skid Row with Slave to the Grind. I mean, that's a power metal album, and they came from the glam stuff. That they were known for their power ballads and stuff, but they went more into they took a little bit more heavy. And I mean, my God, Pantera. Pantera started off as a pure hair band. Look at old photos of Pantera. I mean, you wouldn't even recognize them. Their hair's all big and poofy, and they became the biggest metal guys in the mid '90s, pretty much next to Metallica.
Yeah. So let's kind of triangulate this, and let's get Eric in here. So we're talking 91, right? So Andy is kind of in the metal scene. He's kind of already there. I think he is, like he said, he's the prime audience. He's kind of the demographic, although we technically were at the time also. Where were you at this? And I don't mean physically, but I mean musically. Where were you at? Because I was, I think I'm gonna predict I ended up somewhere in between the two of you.
Yeah, you're right. Metal was not my bag. Was never really. Coming off of the classic bands of the '70s, I was, heavy metal and punk rock were not particularly my taste. But there was a sort of, this stuff kind of came out of nowhere. What I found great about the grunge thing was it was a return to form. Gone were the slick productions, and gone were the synthesizers and the keyboards and the electronic drums. All of a sudden, everybody was going old school again, and that was great. It was going back to using Neve consoles and recording analog again. Even some of the older artists were doing grittier stuff. When I think of like Bruce Springsteen, when he put out those two albums back to back, and his stuff sounded a little bit more raw and harder, I guess, to keep in touch with what was happening in the grunge. And like Tom Petty too, you think of Wildflowers and how warm that album sounded compared to like Full Moon Fever, which was slightly more 80s tinged, higher end. And what were you kind of checking out then at that time? Were you still listening to older music? And I was still,
new music by older artists.
I was still pretty much pretty much both. I was still, at that point, I had just gotten into Layla, the Dominoes record, because it came out in 1990, the 20th anniversary, and that's the first time I really appreciated that record. You and I, Dean, we got into the Beatles in a big way in the late 80s. That's when we discovered the Beatles. So we were still, I'm always looking to the past anyway. I'm always like 10 years behind everything, so I have a very non-linear approach to discovering things. So the grunge thing to me, my first reaction was, while I liked the return, I felt like there was a sort of well, these young upstarts are trying to outdo what I liked from the 70s kind of attitude, So I was slightly a little bit pompous about it. I had my nose stuck in the air, my head buried way down in the sand at the same time, because
I'd like to see a picture of that.
I really didn't appreciate what was happening. I didn't give enough of that stuff a chance. I wasn't really actively looking for anything new at that point. I was still very much in my own little bubble, appreciating the music that I loved. And when I'm in, when I get to like an artist, I'm all in. And I have to know everything about them. I got to know who their heroes were, their influences were. So that, that kind of spreads out from there. So all this stuff coming in, I was like, whoa, this is new. This is different, but I don't know if I want to deal with this right now. But that changed over time. So,
Yeah. And I absolutely was correct, because I had a foot in both, because kind of just before that, in the late 80s, I was working in a record store. So I was exposed to a lot of other things that I might not have been. For instance, well, let's go back. I mean, I've always enjoyed, I enjoy my old stuff, but always open to new stuff. And one of the hardest acts I got into the grunge movement was the Cult. Okay, so I was a big fan of the Cult, and they were really, they could be called hard rock. They could be also be put in the metal arena also. So I was definitely into the Cult. But then when I started working at the record store, everybody that worked at the record store was raving about this band, Guns N' Roses. That's all they were talking about, is this band, Guns N' Roses. We love this band. And this was when Appetite had maybe just come out. And they were playing it at the record store. So I like by association, it was just kind of like I absorbed it, and I got into Guns N' Roses. And then I went to go see them like multiple times. I saw them like so many times it wasn't even funny. So I had a foot in both. But then, I was listening to Full Moon Fever and loving that, and loving the Traveling Wilburys, and still enjoying that stuff, but also almost, kind of being pulled into being exposed to these new types of music, but enjoying it. Like for me, Guns N' Roses, I'm like, well, these guys are like the saviors of rock and roll. Like if anybody's going to do it, it could be them. And that turned out to be wrong, although they did they did it for a while, and they did overlap with Nirvana. But, that was I think Guns N' Roses was kind of like the closest thing possibly to what Nirvana was doing within the metal realm, because they weren't big on the makeup. Maybe in the beginning they were, but they kind of shed that pretty quick, actually. Once they got popular, they really kind of went like an Aerosmith type groove, where they kind of got down and dirty.
I was just about to say that.
Kind of just really kind of understood what I think understood where they were, and were trying to do more with it. So I think I feel like a foot in both worlds here.
Guns N' Roses, the attitude was like their whole thing. I mean, like you almost felt dirty watching them. Their whole attitude and the swagger and everything else was, it wasn't like, kissy lips and girls and all this stuff. It was more like, I'm going to bash this Jack Daniels bottle over your forehead or something, and it's like, okay.
Yeah, there was some menace and some anger there, and which was different than Motley Crue, which was about partying and chicks and Poison, nothing but a good time. So I think they are. You could make the argument that Guns N' Roses was kind of a precursor. Not that Nirvana was influenced by them, but the rise of Guns N' Roses late in the metal game, and them being so hard rock, like kind of really having a harder edge and a more menacing and dangerous edge, almost kind of set the table. And Andy said something very interesting about the vacuum that was being created at that point.
They were in Guns N' Roses carried rock and roll's water for a while. I mean, because what was Appetite was 88, 87, 88. That album came out, and it never died in popularity. It felt like they released a new single like every 8 months or something like that. That album had so many legs, So they definitely carried rock and roll's water for a while.
Yeah, and we would see the kind of the watering down of the hair bands as they became more and more popular. They essentially entered the mainstream. Yeah. Right? For all intents and purposes, if you're seeing Every Rose Has Its Thorn, the top 12 hit of that year, of the year it came out, they're entering the mainstream. So it's almost like a natural evolution, and the time was right, or the the atmosphere was right for this change,
Yeah.
where the metal thing was kind of running its course. It was becoming more and more jokey, and everybody had a gimmick. Every band had, and they all kind of looked the same. So we get to Nirvana, and Nirvana actually had formed well before this, though. They formed in '87, so they were kind of kicking around for a while in that that subculture in Seattle, the punk underground scene kind of a thing. Had gone through a couple of drummers, and then finally in 1990 they got Dave Grohl. So they had released an album before their major label debut, called Bleach, which was on Sub Pop Records, which is the label over there, and it had done okay, but certainly wasn't anything to write home about. Didn't sell a lot, and it's on a smaller label. They get signed to a major label, and they get a budget of $65,000 to record this new album that they're going to do. And they get Butch Vig. There was some other producers that were recommended or kind of put forth, and Nirvana wasn't interested in that, so they went with Butch Vig, and they got down to start to write and recording this album.
And it was recorded at Sound City.
Yeah,
it was one of the. Yeah, Rumors was recorded there, and a bunch of, like, Tom Petty was recorded there. A bunch of people recorded in that studio.
Yeah, iconic studio.
I think that it's crazy because I think Kurt found his voice around the same time that Dave Grohl came in, and it was like a perfect kismet because Dave Grohl is psycho on those drums. I mean, like, if you watch the Reading, I was just watching the Reading video of them playing, he is pounding everything from start to finish. I mean, he's angry. I mean, like, he's smiling too. It's crazy, but he is so violent with what he's doing. And I feel like that was, like, I don't know, like the base of Nirvana, Nevermind, was this driving beat, and I think that, like, the guys that, whoever, I forgot what the guy's name was, who played the drums on Bleach, was very like, it was just very, like, just riding along stuff, and then Dave Grohl comes in and just is like Animal from the Muppets, just going nuts, in the background.
Yeah, he's attacking. And but there was a sense of restraint, though. He did have to pull back to, honor the songs, so he didn't do as many fills as he probably wanted to, or because it just served the music in that way.
But his drumming had some force to it. That's
Absolutely,
the thing. It's kind of like almost like Ian Pace in Deep Purple, where he's like a driving drummer. Like Ian Pace, just like you feel his presence,
right,
but he's not flashy. And Grohl kind of had that kind of untamed but in control style, where you feel like he could go off if he needed to. And those songs really kind of were anchored by the drums, especially in the opening fills of Smells Like Teen Spirit. I mean, that's like a drum, like that song is driven by the drums and by the guitar. But I think most people would say they think of the drums probably mainly in that song. I mean, that's really was like a highlight.
He also
Grohl's playing.
He also added a lot to the because he's an amazing singer. Frankly, I think he's a better singer than Kurt Cobain. That's saying a lot, but I think he brought something, those harmony vocals that he did, the backing vocals on a lot of those songs, where they really made a big difference. I think, when they sang together, really they double tracked them. They double tracked both of their vocals. So there was like 4 tracks of vocals going on, and it sounds amazing when you hit those chorus parts of the songs.
Yeah, I never noticed the harmony as much until the unplugged version, and you can hear him. The camera will go to him, and you hear it. And we'll talk about when we go kind of into the songs and stuff. There's a couple parts on some of the songs where, after being a fan of Foo Fighters for the last 2 decades or whatever, and his voice so well, you can hear, like in Come As You Are, you can hear Dave Grohl, the singer from the Foo Fighters, in the background of a Nirvana song. If you're listening with the headphones,
kind of like, it's funny not to go too far off, but Dave Grohl is so known now as like Foo Fighters, and it's like, oh, he used to be the drummer for Nirvana, kind of like, oh, Paul McCartney he used to be in a band called the Beatles like a long time ago. Like he used to play bass. It's kind of like he's become that. He's like transcended something so like monstrous and iconic that there might be a segment of people that do not know that or know him mainly for Foo Fighters when they were young, and that was like the up and coming band. So that's kind of interesting.
He doesn't talk about it much, does he? When you ever see him interviewed, he doesn't really, he doesn't make a big deal about the fact that he was in Nirvana. I noticed that about him.
He went through a lot of pain and turmoil after the suicide, that he just didn't really want to talk about it for a while. But he's starting to open up more on, like, he was talking on Howard Stern, a lot of kind of the darker stuff about what happened afterwards. But he was writing music when he was in Nirvana, but he never brought it to Kurt. And everybody's always saying, like, why didn't you bring any music to it? And he's like, because I get to be in a band with Kurt Cobain. Like, I'm serving Kurt Cobain songs. Why would I bring in my crap stuff? And it's, which is really interesting. It's very humble too, and I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah. You want an interesting bit of trivia, and this might help for people that are going to listen to Nevermind. Is Cobain intended for the album to sound like a fusion of mainstream pop, so basically kind of a cross between the Knack and Bay City Rollers, crossed with Black Flag and Black Sabbath. So having those darker elements, but also retaining the pop sensibilities, and that's probably one of the things that really made this album as quote unquote, I hate to use the word, as grungy as it is, because a lot of these bands, when you look up interviews with them, they do not like to be associated with the word grunge. They absolutely say, we're not like, Soundgarden and Pearl Jam and Stone Temple Pilots. They're like, we're not grunge. We're like a rock and roll band. And it's almost like that label was kind of pasted on them begrudgingly, like as a genre. But I think when you listen to these songs and you take it from that aspect, you can hear the tunefulness in a lot of these songs. And there also was a formula that Cobain came up with. And if you listen to the songs now, and after finding out about the formula, I hear it and it makes perfect sense. Their formula was soft and quiet, and then loud and hard. Mm-hmm. So if you listen to a lot of the popular songs, the verse is soft and quiet, and then the choruses are loud and hard. And if you think about Smells Like Teen Spirit, it's very like it follows that. If you think about Lithium and some of the and In Bloom, it's the same thing. And Heart Shaped Box, if he had a formula of verses soft and low, and then the chorus is loud and hard.
He stole it from the Pixies. He famously said that he wrote Teen Spirit to be a Pixies song. He wanted to write like the Pixies. So
cool.
Yeah,
I think it was he has a very good sense of melody. And when you get to those chorus parts, when he's screaming, you don't understand a word he's saying. But that to me, it was probably done on purpose, because it was the music that drew you in, right? And then the lyrics came kind of second to that. So once you're drawn into this album, with those hooks, then you're on the other side of that coin with the dark lyrics and in the mood, and you're just like, whoa. It's a pretty intense experience when you're not expecting that. You just were waiting for like a rock and roll song, and he's talking about all kinds of really dark stuff, and you're like, whoa, this is like with Polly. That was one of the darkest songs I think he ever wrote.
There's definitely a lot of a lot of that kind of different. And that was probably what was so shocking too. Like I said, when you contrast it with the pop stuff that was on the charts at the time, the Paula Abdul, etc., and then you also contrast it with the quote unquote metal or hard rock that was going on, which was still kind of tame. Again, it was mostly about partying and having good times and doing things. This brought a different aspect to it. Yeah, a dark song like Polly, or even In Bloom, and all these songs, just a lot of talk about guns in the lyrics. A lot of talk about guns in the lyrics. Yeah. They were kind of really in the whole Seattle scene. I mean, they were a part of a larger thing that was going on too. And everyone will always tag Nirvana as quote unquote the godfathers or the fathers of grunge, as it were. But I think there's a couple of other groups I just want to throw out there also, just to kind of set the scene for Nirvana, and that they really weren't alone in this, although they rose to the top and really epitomized it. But you had Pearl Jam out of Seattle, or out of the Seattle area, right? You had Soundgarden out of the Seattle area also. You had Alice in Chains out of that area. You had Stone Temple Pilots, but they were out of San Diego. But these 5 or 6 bands all kind of epitomized really what this sound was. And they all kind of maybe took it from different aspects, and some got called, people would say Stone Temple Pilots were copying Pearl Jam. These bands really kind of defined that quote unquote grunge sound. What do you think?
Well, you know what's crazy is about 7 or 8 years ago, my wife and I ran a youth group, and some of the Nirvana shirts became in vogue again, for the younger kids and stuff, teenagers and everything. And, I of course had to poke them, like, name a Nirvana song, come on. But, I would start talking to them about it. And there's this idea, like, okay, that like I was saying, I used to watch a lot of documentaries on 80s metal, and just I watch a lot of documentaries anyway. But like, there's stuff about I love the 90s and these kind of stuff, those kind of documentaries, and it's always like music, and then this is going on, and then one day, one band, one album, one song completely changed music as we know it. Dun, 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 ticka, ticka, dun, 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 and it shows the Nirvana album cover coming up. It's like it's this like idea that Nirvana completely changed everything. And I'm thinking, I don't think it was the case. Like, I don't think you're remembering it that correctly, because it did flip everything on its head. But I think that it inadvertently got like turned into the bumper sticker of the movement. Like, the Alice in Chains album, Man in the Box, that was a year earlier. And they were considered grunge or whatever. I mean, they did Facelift a year beforehand. I mean,
yeah.
I don't
and Soundgarden was kicking around for a while too.
Yeah. Pearl Jam was huge. That album was huge. It had hit after hit after hit, and it was released a month before Nevermind. The stuff didn't hit like MTV as quick, and maybe it wouldn't have gotten as popular without Nirvana hitting first. But like, I think that people are forgetting that this stuff was like within weeks of each other. But and I don't know if it was because like when we retroactively look at the 90s, that Kurt becomes the poster child of the 90s because of his like I hate myself, I want to die attitude, whereas like Eddie Vedder was a little handsome and happy, and I mean, he had some dark lyrics, but overall he was jumping around and having a good time, whereas Kurt was staring at his shoes and talking about how everything sucks all the time. Maybe it was that people latched on to his attitude of like, I don't feel great either. So maybe that's what it was. But like Pearl Jam and all those guys were around, and they were putting out hit after hit after hit. But somehow Nirvana has become the godfathers of all of this stuff. And I think it's kind of retroactively been the case. It wasn't really the case when it was happening. At least that I remember. I remember it happening.
I don't know. I'm gonna throw a little thing out there, because you did hit on it. Is that Pearl Jam? Here's a very interesting fact or bit of trivia: is that Pearl Jam did not make music videos. They were against music videos. They did not embrace making music videos. I think they had one video they made a video for Jeremy, and that was it. Some of the other stuff was live after the fact. So the fact that Nirvana had this video, and it was, the imagery was just kind of, it was like with his blonde hair hanging over his eyes, and he's got his striped shirt on, and the cheerleaders in the video, and MTV just picked up and just played the hell out of it. I mean, you have to kind of put that factor in there, is that they were also getting that extra exposure, because that was MTV was for me was replaced the radio. I was still watching MTV, so I was definitely getting exposed to that, and would have to find Pearl Jam elsewhere, either maybe on the radio or through word of mouth, because they were not making videos actively. Were not making videos, so it was almost like by default. You're right, like Nirvana was there, they were making hits. Soundgarden hadn't become big yet, but Alice in Chains, you're right, that album Dirt had come out like before that.
It was Facelift.
But it kind of hadn't. It almost kind of picked up steam based off of Nevermind, because then people went back, and it's like, oh, there's this fertile fertile ground of music swelling out of Seattle. Who else is there? And that's whenever, you just started kind of picking up, and then everybody kind of got exposed that way. Pearl Jam and Soundgarden and all those other Seattle bands. What's curious about all of this is that dark lyrics and heavy music has always existed. I mean, through 88, 89, Metallica did And Justice for All, and then, there's Megadeth albums, and there was Slayer albums, and there's there's punk rock albums. All of it has always existed. The curious part about it is why is a 13-year-old cheerleader now accepting this? Like, why is this pop to a teenager now? Like, how did we go from Paula Abdul to, songs about, like Jeremy? I mean, Jeremy was, about a kid shooting up his classroom, and the video was like shocking. And that's why it got so popular, because it was such the imagery and everything was so shocking. But like, how did we go from, straight up, now tell me, do you want to love me forever? From Paula Abdul to, Jeremy spoke in class today. How is this, how do we get there? So I think it's the MTV effect. I think when MTV picks up on something, or it starts to gain traction, they were the modern day of or the modern version of DJs pushing stuff on the charts, right? I mean, you can't underestimate the impact that MTV had on those types of choices. And if something, if they showed like the Nirvana video on 120 minutes or whatever the alternative block was that they would have, or Headbangers Ball or whatever, and then it would pick up steam, then they would start showing it during like the primetime hours. And then all of a sudden it became like, oh, here's something new. And I don't think we can undersell the impact of MTV, because those kids were at home after school and they were watching MTV. And again, that was the new radio for them also. So basically, and then MTV needs more content. So who else do you have from Seattle? Oh, Pearl Jam, Soundgarden, all these other ones. And you saw literally, Andy, you're right. It was like a switch flipping of all of a sudden, like the Paula Abdul's was kind of less and less. And then you started seeing all these other grunge or Candlebox and all these other types of, it kind of kickstarted a whole new industry of quote unquote grunge, but also alternative. I think also we were ready for something a little different. I remember like right around 1990, I remember a lot of my friends started to get into like Faith No More, which is a little bit more of that funk metal kind of almost rappy stuff. It was like these things don't mix, but they're mixing, and they're mixing great. Same thing with Red Hot Chili Peppers were getting kind of big. That was kind of an alternative thing, but that's nowhere near like Primus and stuff. That's not Nirvana. That's like, it was almost like a novelty, but it was fun and it was good, but they were talented musicians. But like, it was almost like we're getting steered in that direction to be open to other things, and I think that they kind of opened up my mind a little bit. I mean, like, another thing too is like, I was all metal all the time, and I loved the Beastie Boys, and the Beastie Boys started getting into like playing funk instrumentals on their albums and stuff, and I was like, wow, this is really cool. And like those are those things that kind of opened me up to like, okay, maybe I'll give this a chance, and that kind of opened me up to a lot more genres and stuff. I think we were very strict in our genres leading up to 1990, and I think that we kind of branched out into like a cornucopia of music in the 90s. Yeah, which leads us to smack dab landing on Nevermind. Yeah. And you've got 12 tracks of just music that was just it was genre changing or genre defining. And we're going to get into it now, and we're not going to go chapter and verse over every track, but I think what we want to do is definitely acknowledge, for me, the first side is probably almost as classic as you're going to get. I mean, you pretty much get the Nirvana experience pretty much in the first 6 songs, right? You've got Smells Like Teen Spirit, In Bloom, Come As You Are, Breed, Lithium, and Polly. So you've got pretty much everything. Now you've got the darkness and the menace of Polly. You've got the breakout of Smells Like Teen Spirit, and then you've got the kind of the more poppy stuff with In Bloom. I think it's all right there, really, in the first side. And punk rock with Breed. That's pure punk rock. Yeah. Yeah.
I like In Bloom because I love the groove to it. More sort of on the groovier side of things. So I dig that. think Stone Temple Pilots kind of captured that, a little bit more, with their stuff too. So, but yeah, those songs like that were more probably ones that I gravitated more the most.
Is that your favorite track?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. What about you, Andy? What are some of the highlights?
Okay, well, I mean, I remember the very first time I ever heard Nirvana. Like, it was yesterday. It was fried into my brain. And what's so crazy about it is they're not my favorite band in the world. I love them and I appreciate them, and they changed music for the better. I love them to death. But I remember it was fried into my brain. Then I heard it was I was sitting there in my bedroom, pre-internet, just probably strumming the guitar or whatever to whatever. And my sister's boyfriend at the time said, "Do you want to go to the record store with me?" Which, when you're 14 and some cool guy says, "Come to the record store with me," you say, "Of course I'm going to go to the record store with you." So he's like, "I want to go pick up a tape from this new band called Nevada, and I think they're British." I'm like, so everything was wrong to begin with. So we get in the car, and he had this 70s Volkswagen squareback, almost like a station wagon Volkswagen thing, lowrider. No back seats, just a gigantic subwoofer. Like, the entire back of the car was a speaker. And we're driving there, and I'm getting a contact high just being in the car. And he goes in and gets the tape, and he puts the tape in and just cranks it all the way up. And I think that's when he said, "I think they're British." And I was like, okay. And it's just those first four chords and that drum, and it was so loud that it felt like I was at a concert. And it was just seared into my brain. I'd never heard anything like this before. And I think that it was so cool. And when he starts singing, everything stops and he starts singing, and the lyrics are so haunting. Not the lyrics, the tones of his voice. It's very ethereal, and people, you can never go back and hear that song for the first time, because we've heard that song so much now that it's become part of the furniture. But the first time you hear it, it's like, wow, this is awesome. This is really, really cool, And I remember we're listening to it all the way down Dale Mabry, the highway in Tampa. And I remember exactly where I was when I looked at a store when I heard Come As You Are for the first time. The feeling of that song, I had never heard. I don't think I'd ever heard anything like that before. It's very, like a texture, like watery. It's like a watery song. It's very aquatic. I can't explain it. And it's so beautiful. But I just, hearing this album for the first time just seared into my brain. And I can't say that for a lot of my favorite albums. I don't remember the first time I heard them, but I remember first time I heard every track on that album. But after,
it's funny you mentioned "Come As You Are," because that's okay. It's just, there's a bit of trivia. It made me smile because you said I never heard anything like it. That song is kind of a plagiarist's delight.
Oh yeah,
because there's two bands that are really kind of associated with it. One, there's a band called The Damned, and they had a song called "Life Goes On." Go find that on YouTube. The riff is unmistakable, and you can say, well, yeah, they stole it from them. Well, not really, because there was another band called Killing Joke after The Damned, and they had a song called "80s," and they actually stole the riff from The Damned and kind of adapted it.
Yeah.
And now, if you go listen to "Come As You Are," you will hear the exact same riff as the Killing Joke song, and Killing Joke wasn't none too happy, but they did not decide to pursue any legal avenues. And I'm going to guess, because if they did, it probably would have opened them up to The Damned getting involved with what they did in their song.
Yeah.
So this was kind of like everybody kind of stealing from each other, and everybody looking at each other uncomfortably in the room, knowing that they stole from each other, but no one wants to say anything, because if one does, then everybody's going to get in trouble. So it's just kind of an interesting bit of trivia. Go on YouTube, you could just literally search Nirvana, Killing Joke, The Damned, and you'll get a bunch of videos that compare it. So, again, Eric and I, we talked a lot on our Led Zeppelin show about stealing riffs and not giving credit. And it just goes to show that it's a universal theme throughout music, is that, is it stealing? Is it flattery? Is it adapting? Whatever it is, but people are taking things and using them. And you know what? "Come As You Are" is a great song. It's got that atmospheric that shimmery guitar with the chorus in it and everything, just like you said it. And they do it, if they're going to use that riff, they use it to great effect.
Yeah, there's a famous line, there's a famous quote that somebody says, good artists borrow and great artists steal. Yeah, the Killing Joke 80s, that's the riff. I mean, it's exactly the riff. I think it was more of the feeling of the emotion of it. Like there's an emoting to it, and like I said earlier with Come As You Are, when, the don't have a gun part, you can hear Dave Grohl very clearly in that song that you never noticed before until after you've heard him sing for all those years. With what you asked me earlier, what my favorite song on the album was. I mean, it's changed over time, but like I've heard the album so many times that the only song that I keep going back to over and over and over again is Territorial Pissings. I love that song because listen to it again with this in mind. It starts off with this, rolling drum beat or whatever, and the song feels like he's pulling an arrow back and just lets go, because like it's going and he actually makes the sound boom, and it goes off, and then he does the when I was an alien, whatever. Just listen to it again and picture somebody pulling back an arrow, and it just shoots off for like 3 minutes, and it's so fast and it's so brutal. I love that song so much. I mean, all the songs mean something to me, but that song still holds up to where I can just throw it on right now and not think about the time that I heard it in between Budweiser commercials or, that sort of stuff. It's just one of those things that just holds up. I love that song so much.
Yeah, I'm gonna go with the Lithium as mine, because it's a really good example of the low high aesthetic that they were going for, like with the soft and quiet, loud and hard. But Lithium does it really. I really like Cobain's, because he does the, like in Teen Spirit, he does the soft, and then his, the choruses are really screeching, like he really kind of amps it up. But in Lithium, he does the same thing, but I really like the controlled growl that he has on the choruses when he's singing. Yeah. If you listen to that, it's got the growl to it and it's got the bite, but it's a little more controlled. So it wasn't just kind of raw. It was more, it feels like it was more thought out of kind of control, keeping it under control, but getting that feeling across. And I really dug it. One of the great things about this album is, it's the songs are accessible. I mean, the longest song, not including like the hidden track at the very end, but Smells Like Teen Spirit is the longest song at 5 minutes. The other stuff is 3 minutes, 2 minutes. So you might think, well, this kind of stuff isn't for me. I think you can get through a 2-minute song, and again, they're even the kind of the raunchy stuff is still got some tunefulness to it. It's not just like a mess all over the place. Yeah. And that's one of the beauties of this album is it's got a raw sound, but it's got that tunefulness in it. So when you're listening to stuff like In Bloom, that's just a straight up kind of, a poppy rock song, and then you've got those other songs where they go in hard, but they're not just kind of like going on and on where it's like, when does this song end? They kind of get to the point real quick. They give you the song and then they kind of get out and then they give you something else, which really makes it accessible, as opposed to, this is going to be a drag to listen to. You're not going to get too involved. And like I said, the first 5 or 6 songs, definitely the first 4 or 5, were on the radio anyway. So when if you were half awake in the 90s, you'll pretty much be able to listen to this and get through most of it and be like, oh, okay, I pretty much recognize most of it. So that's the beauty of it, is as wildly popular as it was, it allowed some of these other songs to get released and kind of get out there. And then some of them would become like more album oriented rock tracks that you would hear, like Something in the Way and some of those more kind of understated songs, which, fun fact, Something in the Way is was used in the Batman trailer, the new Batman with Robert Pattinson. Mm. They used that song. So Nirvana makes a comeback there with the song being, at least in the trailer. Don't know if it's going to be in the movie.
What's funny is In Bloom, the chorus is almost like a nursery rhyme. He's the one who sings all the pretty songs. It's sung like a nursery rhyme.
Yeah, it's sing-songy.
But here's what's crazy, and this is a whole other subject on top of this record, is that Kurt Cobain was obsessed with Kiss. He loved Kiss. They even did a cover version of "Do You Love Me" from Kiss, and they are the antithesis of Nirvana. Like they are, you like my 7-inch leather heels and whatever. Like those lyrics, where it's all about the women and money and everything else. And Kurt was trying to be anti that, but that was one of his favorite groups. And like when they were recording this album, Butch Vig kept saying that he had to keep coaxing Kurt to do certain things, and he would do it by saying, well, John Lennon did it, or and he'd be like, okay, like Kurt wanted to have a rock album and to be a rock star. And what's so crazy about that is like after a while, kind of a misconception, like I think a lot of people forget about, like I think he achieved like God status, Kurt Cobain, but like back then, like by 94, by the time he killed himself, everybody was kind of sick of his shit. Like they were sick of the I hate myself, I want to die, old rock stardom is so horrible, corporate magazines suck, I hate being rich, I'm so punk rock, and it gets to this point where you're like, okay, but you wanted this, I understand, you don't be careful what you ask for and stuff like that, but this was like 3 or 4 years total that all of this happened, and then he started showing up to like award shows high with his baby hanging off of his arm, and he was kind of like heroined out and all this stuff, and it was just sad, and we were all kind of moving on from Nirvana around 94 anyway when this all happened. So it was kind of sad, but at the same time, like I don't feel like that grunge I hate myself and want to die thing was sustainable for years and years. I feel like it had its moment, and when Dave Grohl came in with the Foo Fighters and all of his videos were happy and jokes, like he did a Mentos commercial for his everybody was like, thank God there's some, like, people were smiling for once. It was like a very short period of time where everybody got really, really sad and really, really angry, and then after a while it was just like, my God, come on, like there's a Mentos commercial, let's do that, so I feel like the grunge lifestyle and Kurt himself burned very bright and couldn't sustain itself, But I mean, that's what
I think he set the blueprint for it. I think that's what it was. Is that whole and he did lead a tortured life. I mean, he had a lot of problems, a lot of issues with you said, be careful what you wish for, you might get it, because he got it and then just it wasn't what he wanted, or wasn't what he thought he wanted, or what it was going to be, and it became a problem, unfortunately. But what he had done, or what Nevermind had done, is it kind of set the wheels in motion for people to evolve that music. So yeah, it did start off with, kind of complainy or a lot of angst, a lot of angst ridden and a lot of darkness, but it had evolved, right? Pearl Jam was evolving. Stone Temple Pilots were evolving. And then, Foo Fighters and just all the other quote unquote alternative acts that it did spawn, just like with metal, when metal started out harder and then it became hair metal and became glammy and it became jokey, the same thing happened, right? Yeah. Like Nirvana kind of lit the powder keg. Then these other bands came, like the original Graduating Class, Pearl Jam, Soundgarden, and all those other ones. But then the next ones were a little bit lighter, a little bit kind of poppier, and a little bit more radio friendly. Yeah. And then the next group was straight up alternative pop. And you see that it's just almost like a natural progression where someone starts out really hard, and then the next wave kind of is influenced by it, but not as deeply or not as harshly, and they kind of lighten it up a little bit.
Yeah, I think that he is the poster child because he was the character playing what everybody was feeling at that exact same moment. But I feel like with all things in life, it's just you got to move on eventually from that, and I think that we did. I think that he stayed there and kind of went darker, and we were kind of like, hey, sorry, dude, I got to go listen to some happier music for a little while,
So do you think you aged out pretty quick from it? Like so if you were 14 when it came out, by the time In Utero came out, which was like 93, you were already like 16, probably maybe close to 17. Do you think you were like, okay, you were out, quote unquote, outgrowing it?
No, I think because I mean, right around that time, 94, 95, I was the Crow soundtrack changed my life. I love that. And like right around Pulp Fiction, the Crow was opening up all kinds of, like, their soundtracks were opening up all kinds of neat stuff, and so I was branching out. But I feel like I was saying, and I might be projecting this, it might be just me or the people that I was around, but like Kurt Cobain along with Courtney Love had become a tabloid couple at this point. So it's not about after in utero, he's a heroin addict. He OD'd and like, there's Courtney Love again. She punched a reporter. Oh, who gives a crap? Eventually it became a joke after a while. So it was like, if he would, when the acoustic album, the Unplugged album came out, I think that reinvigorated me quite a bit with them, because they didn't do all of their own songs. They did a lot of covers, and to see, like in Where Did She Sleep Last Night? When my girl don't lie to me, tell me where did you sleep last night? When he's singing that song, there's a point where he looks like he is just tortured. There's like one shot where he looks up, and it's just like, man, this guy's got something going on, and you feel for him in this stripped down kind of feeling. So like, it kind of reinvigorated the way I felt about them during the time. But he had become kind of a cartoon at that point before this happened. Everybody else had kind of moved on to other stuff. It wasn't really an age out thing. It was more of like, there's just so much out there now, that to pick from.
My experience was this was probably the only album that kind of fell through the cracks with me. I always kept it at arm's length, and maybe it's because of all of that empathy/apathy that was going on. That heavy, it was really thick, at that point. And and one day people were loving him, the next day people were like, "Oh, he's an asshole. He's got an attitude problem. He's." So I'm like, why should I get into this album? This is so huge. When this guy, I'm not really I'm not going to be a fan of this guy. I don't like, because it's pretty ignorant of me to say this, but it's just that's how I felt at the time. I didn't know, I didn't live that. I wasn't one of those people that was experiencing that kind of angst and, so I didn't quite understand it. The album I had other, I had Purple, I had, Pearl Jam Versus, I had 10, I had all of those records, but this one just escaped me. And I didn't come to it till much later on. And it might've been the Unplugged that actually, you're right, Andy, that performance really drew me in, and I was like, okay, this guy there's something going on here. So it wasn't until like when I moved to Florida and I met you, Andy, and the social circle down there, and you guys kind of opened my eyes to a lot more of this stuff because you were younger and you still kind of listening. So I came to know it then, and of course 20 years later I really dived into it with the anniversary edition. So there was a lot of like all the bonus stuff on it. I really got a sense of what this band was all about in a much bigger way, and not only just saying that this is a great sounding album, but really kind of dove right in and understood what he was actually talking about, so that was pretty much my experience with the record. I wish I had that.
Yeah, I think
like you did, where you would listen to it for the first time and you were like, whoa, I didn't quite have that experience at all with it. So unfortunately,
yeah,
I lost.
And I think, but you know what? It's like I always say, right? I've said it on other episodes. It's old music is new if you've never heard it before. Yeah. So it's a new experience, for anybody that hasn't heard it. Yeah. A funny thing came to me when I was just thinking about, how Nirvana was kind of on the precipice of exposing kind of what Green Day did. Green Day got a lot of flack because they were supposedly a punk band, and then they got popular, and a lot of people were giving them flack for kind of selling out. And Nirvana kind of was on the same type of thing because they were really kind of not hardcore, but their sound previous was kind of heavy and really dirty. And then they get the big label contract, and they it gets really kind of slick, cleaned up and slicked over and presented to the masses. But yeah, that's the point of that kind of thing is their evolution from those rough and tumble albums on the Sub Pop label to something polished, and that's what they wanted. I mean, that's why they picked Butch Vig. They could have gone with a down and dirty producer, but they were looking for something that was a little more polished, that was like a real record. Yeah. And you need that for those songs like In Bloom and Come As You Are. You need to present those songs in the right way, because if you don't, those songs could easily sound like a mess.
Yeah.
The whole album could sound like a mess. If this was not produced right, this could just sound like noise.
Didn't he say?
And the fact that they had a vision for it and wanted it to sound a certain way, like Andy said, how Butch Vig was like, yeah, you want this to sound a certain way? Well, then you got to listen to me. We got to double track the vocal, or we got to do it this way. Having somebody that could guide them and not just, kind of say, okay, let's do whatever you want. I think it was very, very important for this album because it had that polished sound, but that hard edge also, that was something that wasn't heard before in this type of a way. Like I said, that literally seemingly sprang out of nowhere in 91.
Didn't he say that he was embarrassed by it, Kurt Cobain? Like when he with the finished product, he was,
yeah.
Oh, this album embarrassed me. Like really, like,
I think Dave Grohl kind of dispelled that myth that I think Kurt loved it until he realized everybody else loved it too, and then he started poo-pooing.
Then he had to hate it.
So then the reaction was the next album will be produced by Steve Albini, who's kind of more underground. They don't want it. He doesn't want it to sound as corporate anymore. But what's funny and ironic is that "Smells Like Teen Spirit" was written. He said that, quote, he was disgusted with my generation's apathy. That's why he wrote "Smells Like Teen Spirit," and then he became the literal poster child of his generation's apathy. There's a band around that time. You mentioned Green Day. There's a band called Jawbreaker that actually toured with Nirvana that I love. They have an album called "Dear You," and they have a song called "Save Your Generation" that talks about the grunge generation. Like, the chorus is like, "We're killing each other by sleeping in." Like, why does nobody care anymore? Like, get up and do something, sort of thing. So I feel like there was after a while, the slacker generation, the people that were, part of it were kind of like, this, like I said before, it's just not sustainable. We got to do something. We can't just sit around and stare at our shoes all the time and, wear thrift store clothes all day. We got to do something, like let's go do something cool, sorry. I was just going to say the production on the album, like In Bloom, the beginning of In Bloom, that it is so big. Like if you blast your stereo, that production is unparalleled. Like, it's funny because I've seen Garbage a couple times live. They're amazing live. And like, it's one of the first bands I've ever gone just to see the drummer, because he's such a huge, other than like Phil Collins and stuff, but I mean, like his station on earth is so big. Like I wanted to just go watch Butch Vig perform something, because I respect him so much, because he did so much stuff with, like, the Smashing Pumpkins, and he defined the mid 90s.
Yeah, after this he pretty much wrote his after this he wrote his meal ticket. I mean, being the producer for one of the biggest albums. You know what? I mean, I don't even think he cashed in. If you look at his discography, he had done some big stuff, but yeah, then he went and formed Garbage, and that became like the passion project, and stayed with that for a while. So it's, kind of interesting how he was kind of, and he did a lot of remixes and some other work, but never exploded into that. He's pretty much known for this album. It's not like he's known for like doing some other iconic stuff, like Rick Rubin is known for Tom Petty. He's known for the Beastie Boys. He's known for the Avery, like he's Johnny Cash. He's like kind of all over the place. And Butch Vig is kind of known like really for this one album for the most part. But Andy, you were saying about Cobain and about the other band Jawbreaker and Get Up and Do Something. It's not a secret that Cobain was a fan of the melody first, and the lyrics were not as important.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Is it possible that he wrote this stuff and people took it so seriously that maybe he's like, you know what, I just, like, you're kind of putting this on me, when these are just lyrics, kind of like John Lennon. John Lennon would write lyrics. And he goes, these are just lyrics. They're stuff, might be about me going out to get the paper in the driveway, but you're putting something else on it.
Bob Dylan said that too. He said the same thing too.
Yeah. Dada lyric writing. He said as much. Every once in a while, he'll say something about a specific song, like Teen Spirit. He said that he was disgusted with his generation's apathy. But I think, there was an interview with, is it Christ or Christ Novoselic?
Novoselic.
Yeah.
I looked up the in preparation.
Okay.
I said, I need to get the phonetic saying of how his name is, because if I say it wrong, someone will roast me.
Oh,
so
God
I went online and I looked up the phonetic spelling, and it's Chris Novoselic.
Okay. Well, they can make fun of me because I didn't know. after all these years, you see a name printed for so long, and
Uh,
he became a senator or something. He famously has said in a lot of interviews that people just try to pick apart Kurt's lyrics all the time, but it's so like we talked about this earlier, just how prophetic some of the stuff he was saying. Like, he swears that he doesn't have a gun. He's the one who sings all the pretty songs, and he likes to sing along and likes to shoot his gun. Like, he doesn't know what it means. There's just all of these lyrics, and it's like he's singing, and come as you are. I swear that I don't have a gun, and you're like, yeah, you do. Unfortunately, so there's
yeah,
he,
yeah.
he
It's strange that the obsession with it.
yeah. So yeah, it is very, very specific. Did you see
So,
Montage of
what
Heck?
I want to ask you about In Utero. So you were talking about Steve Albini,
Yeah.
and you're saying they were looking for something different in Utero. Do you think it sounds different?
Yeah, it's a lot rawer. It sounds a little less polished, but it still sounds like Nirvana. Like if you listen to Heart Shaped Box, the clean tones of the guitars are still slightly distorted, and I think they just didn't want it to sound anything like the other one. And I feel like they had to sound like. I mean, they're the band. I mean, they're writing the songs like this, but I feel like the production of it was pulled back quite a bit. But I feel like I feel like it was a little bit different. It feels a little more raw, and I don't think the songs are. I don't think the songs are as accessible as Nevermind. I think that there's some songs on there that are like, wow, that's on this record. That's pretty interesting.
What this led to, we kind of touched on it, is that the floodgates would literally open for, again, I'll put it in quotes, grunge, but all those artists do not like to be called grunge artists, but that's what the genre was named, and it literally really kind of created the subgenre where it started out as a certain way, and like we said, Pearl Jam and these other bands, and then the offshoots of that, where labels are just signing anybody that kind of sounded like it was maybe just a little bit edgy, like the Offspring, and then you had Smash Mouth, which was a little bit lighter, and it just kind of kept going and kept kind of recloning itself, but each time a little bit weaker or a little bit more poppier, and that kind of we have to remember that we need to really retrace that back to 1991 with what Nirvana did. It's such an important album. It absolutely, if you haven't heard it, or if you've only heard the singles, I mean, it absolutely deserves a listen. And I think, Eric, do you think it? I think it holds up. I mean, 10 million copies.
Well, it does for me.
You've got one. Do you have one of those 10 million copies?
I do, actually. I did.
Okay, Andy's got one, and I've got one. So that's 3.
Yeah,
that's 3 of the 10 million. So there's a whole bunch of other people out there that have it. If you haven't heard it yet, absolutely give it a listen. Go to Spotify, just put it on, and it's a quick listen. There's a lot to it, a lot of different textures to it, but that's what makes it so great too. Is you hear the hard stuff like Teen Spirit, and then it follows up with some poppy rock, and then it goes hard again. It's just got a lot there for you, and it's absolutely. You could feel Cobain's angst or his pain, even if it wasn't apparent to us yet at the recording of that or afterwards. You absolutely feel that there's something going on with him. His vocals are sometimes they're just scorching, right? They're absolutely screeching, and
he would blow the vocal cords out in a couple of those songs while recording him. He just couldn't do another take because it was the vocal were literally so strained. Yeah.
What's crazy is the amount of growth between Bleach and Nevermind. I mean, he grows dramatically as an artist between those two albums, and almost changes genres a little bit. If almost felt like Bleach was a little bit more college rock. I don't even know what the word is. I mean, it was not. I guess.
Yeah, it sounded a lot more underground.
Yeah.
But if you listen to a lot of those earlier records, even like Stone Temple Pilots, the Core. To me, they sounded like Nirvana. That album sounded like Nirvana. So I really, at the time, you don't really know. A lot of these bands kind of sounded the same, like they sent the same kind of thing. So it took that next album to really separate them and to divide them apart and really do something different.
Yeah, and then so tragically, Cobain would kill himself. That would lead to Nirvana dissolve. Effectively, Nirvana was done as a band. Like we had talked about earlier, Dave Grohl had some musical aspirations, but never never, kind of took the back seat and said, I'm the drummer in this band, and kind of, Cobain is the master lyricist and he's the leader. But meanwhile, Dave Grohl is kind of hoarding some songs and doing some demos, and Nirvana breaks up, and he's like, you know what, I'm going to go into the studio and I'm just going to record this stuff by myself, solo, and I'll call it Foo Fighters just so people don't know that it's me, or that they'll think it's a band, and I'll record this. And he does that, and he makes a few cassettes and gives them to people, and the response was overwhelmingly positive. So, it's one of those weird stories, right? That the drummer, you would never think that skinny dude in the back with the long hair would now become this front man, and literally a rock and roll. I'm not going to say grunge, because I don't think so. Foo Fighters is squarely rock and roll to me. Mm-hmm. He would become this, literally the herald, the second coming of rock music through the 90s. Really, I don't even think he picked up the mantle of Nirvana, because Foo Fighters was something different. It was a different sound. He wasn't trying to. He was firmly rooted in like rock and roll,
like Americana
and heavy guitar. Yeah. So Grohl just kind of evolves into something totally different than what you would think. Like these guys would fade off into obscurity, or he even said in interviews, I fully planned on becoming a drummer. Tom Petty even asked him, to be the drummer after Stan Lynch was around the time they were having problems with him. So he had opportunities to just kind of transition into another band and just kind of and be the drummer. Yeah. But instead he's like, no, you know what? You've got nothing to lose. And everything to gain, and he did. And Foo Fighters is just as iconic, or as even beloved. I mean, weren't they inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame already? I think.
Yeah, what's amazing about him too is, rewinding. A friend of mine right out of high school, he said he called me up and he's like, "Hey, the drummer from Nirvana is going to play at Masquerade in Ybor." I'm like, "Play what?" He's like, "He's got a band or something. You want to go?" And I was like, "Sure." And we went and saw them, Foo Fighters, and the Masquerade in Ybor City with 200 other people. It was like nobody. It was one of the very first around the tour with Foo Fighters with them, and they blew everybody out of the water. Like they couldn't believe that a drummer was singing and stuff like that. They didn't have a song on the radio yet or any of that stuff, or just barely had one on the radio. So I got to see them up close or whatever. They opened up for the Amps, which was Kim Deal from. My brain's going blank, but anyway, great show. But
the Breeders.
The Breeders. So right, you're talking about the evolution of Dave Grohl, but like, not only has he evolved into the savior of rock and roll, I don't think that's not hyperbole. Like he has kept rock and roll on the radio for the last 20 years. When things have gone electronic, boy bands, all this stuff, he's kept rock and roll, big old fat drums and guitars, on the radio. But he has evolved as a human. If you look at him in Nirvana interviews, even the first couple records of Foo Fighters, he's nervous and like kind of hunched over and always kind of like looking out of the corner of his eye and like, yeah, man, I like it. That's cool or whatever. And now he's like, yeah, I'm Dave Grohl, man. Like he's a character now. He'll just run around a room and scream. Like he's evolved as a human. And like apparently, I know a lot of people that have met him, and I've never heard a single negative comment about the guy. Like he is just the coolest guy in the world. Like he's said in interviews before that, there's big festivals and there's other bands there and everybody wants to stay in their little room and not talk to anybody. And the first thing he does is he grabs a bottle of Jack and a bunch of shot glasses and he goes from band to band. Like, come on, man, let's get some shots together. And they start doing shots with other bands. And he was like, he wants everybody packed in the, he's just like the ambassador of rock, and that's just that wouldn't have happened if Nirvana was still around, or maybe it would have happened, but in a different way. And like, I mean, I think Everlong is one of the best rock and roll songs ever written, in my opinion. I love that song. And that was on his second album. Who knows if that would have ever been written if Nirvana ever broke up. I just think it's just fortuitous, but tragic.
Yeah. One of the great what ifs in rock and roll music, right, is what if. A lot of people say, well, what if Elvis didn't die? Elvis really only would have affected only himself. But what if Cobain did not take his life? What would Grohl have done? It's kind of interesting. And since this situation was put to him, he had choices to make and said, I'm going to go for it. So it's pretty amazing. So a lot of interesting things happened as a result of that, right? The cottage industry of grunge, alternative rock, alternative pop, and rise of the Foo Fighters. I think to wrap this up, we've hit on a lot, but I think the important thing is that, from different points of view, Nirvana, it was a monster, and it did represent a change that was coming. It represented a change from what was and what was going on in the charts, and it represented a change of what would come and what they would inspire. And some clones, some knockoffs, and again the evolution of that sound into something more poppy and more mainstream. So I highly recommend that everybody go check it out. It's easily available. There's all different kinds of editions on Spotify. There's a special edition, regular edition, maxi edition, all kinds of crazy stuff. But that's going to do it for us in Nirvana. I want to thank Andy Cremeans for being with us.
Hey, thanks for having me. This is fun.
Check him out on Andy Cremeans Art, and that's on Instagram. Like I said, he's an amazing artist. So this is the free plug.
You're too kind.
Go check him out. He really does amazing work. He does a lot of work for Spooky Empire every year. He does their artwork, and I get to see it every year. And it's usually Kiss based and monster based.
Yep.
A clash between the two. And if you don't think it could be pulled off, Andy does it. So I want to thank Andy for showing up and helping us sort through this and giving his unique point of view. Obviously, as always, Eric is with me, and I'm Dean. We want to thank you for taking the ride with us. We appreciate the support. You can find us on social media. You can find us on Facebook and Instagram. And as always, we will see you on the flip side.
You've been listening to the 3324 podcast with Dean Legiro and Eric Kuber. You can find us on your favorite podcast provider, so please like, subscribe, and rate to become a part of the 3324 family. Your feedback is important, so make sure to follow us on Instagram and Facebook at 3324 podcast and on Twitter at 3324p to join the conversation.